Hi, I'm Robert Alaniz, and welcome to another episode of Collecting the King. This is episode 2. Each show is going to have an Elvis Presley song for a title. So episode 1 we called Memories. And the reason for that was because it was basically a trip down memory lane. This show, we're going to be calling it I Gotta Know. There's a lot of things you got to know about collecting. The more you collect, the longer you do it, the more you learn about it, and the more experience you get. So what I wanted to talk about in this episode was basically how do you get started? There are a lot of younger people out there who are starting to collect Elvis, and it's pretty interesting because they get all excited over records and items that, to me are pretty common. It's kind of fun to see somebody get all excited about getting their very first copy of Love Letters from Elvis, for example. If you want to start collecting like original first pressings of Elvis's records, and what I mean by first pressings is it's the very first issue of that album, because some of them have been issued many, many times. Like Elvis's Golden Records has been issued, about 20 times. You have to know which one is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth, etc. And there's ways to know that, but it's very complicated, and that's why we have Presleyana, which is a great book or reference book, so that you know how many pressings there were, etc. I know some collectors that started off collecting reissues first because they're the least expensive. You could probably get reissues for the average of $10 to $20. And it's a good way of getting Elvis's complete catalog. And I know a lot of collectors that started that way, where they started off by collecting reissues, and then what they would do as time went by, and they would eventually buy first pressings and replace the reissues with the first pressings, and this would help them build their collection. I thought it might be interesting to show you some of the reissues and the differences between the originals and the reissues. This is actually a first pressing of Girl Happy. As you can see, it has the Nipper dog on the cover, and up at the top it says stereo, and it has the catalog number. Okay, that's a first pressing. Now here is a reissue, which came out many, many years later. This, as a matter of fact, is a pretty rare reissue. It's an AFL1. And again, you'll see it's the cover and everything looks pretty much the same. The only thing that's different is you have the RCA up here, which is the later RCA block letters logo. And then you have Victor over here on this side. And that's what they did with the reissues. They divided up and put RCA and then Victor. And you'll notice that the dog is gone, who is called Nipper, by the way. So that's the difference between the two. Otherwise, they're both pretty much the same, as you can see. They look the same. And if you look at the backs are also pretty much the same. Now, every once in a while on a reissue, you'll find something like an RE or something like that is short for reissue. This happens to have an RE2, very small, and you have to look for them. And when you see those, then you obviously know you've got a reissue. They used some covers over and over again, and a good example of that was Elvis for Everyone. For some reason, that cover just never changed, and it went through about 5 or 6, maybe even more than that, reissues until they finally decided to do something distinctive with the cover. So if you find a sealed copy of Elvis for Everyone, the only way that you really honestly are going to be able to tell is to open it to see what's inside, okay? There are orange label rigid records that came out in 1968 when RCA decided to change their label from black to orange. And then in 1971, they put it out again, but they used less vinyl and called it Dynaflex. So there are these rigid orange labels, and then these flexible orange labels. Then after that, again, there was another change, and then there were tan labels, and then they went back to the black label. Here is an original spin out, and you'll notice that spin out has the hype sticker on it, which says that it includes the bonus photo. And the bonus photo was something that RCA did quite a bit, and I don't know how much the Colonel had an influence on that, but I know the Colonel, as a bonus, he would put in a picture of Elvis inside the record. Most of the soundtracks had that, and I think personally it's because they didn't sell that well. and it was not exactly the peak of Elvis's career. So they would throw these photos in to help sales. So as I said, this is an original Spin Out, and then here is a reissue of Spin Out, and this one came out in 1977. Now the difference is that Spin Out did not do well. It did not sell very well, and because it didn't sell very well, it was deleted. It never got into an orange label or a tan label or anything like that. It was pretty much deleted, along with another title like Frankie and Johnny. Same situation. So after Elvis died, they went into this mass production of his albums, of his catalog. And Spin Out had been deleted, but they pulled it. They decided, well, that's okay. We're going to go ahead and just make it again. So Spin Out actually made a return as a reissue after Elvis died. Interesting story is that everybody thought that Frankie and Johnny was going to come out in 77 after Elvis died, because it too was a deleted title. But what actually happened was RCA had sold, I think, about 10 of the songs or 8 of the songs from Frankie and Johnny to Pickwick. And Pickwick had already put out a Pickwick album called Frankie and Johnny. So they weren't entitled to those songs, and that's probably the reason why there was no Frankie and Johnny reissue after Elvis died. But again, if you look, back covers are pretty much the same, and the only difference is one down here on the reissue. It'll say that it's previously released as LSP with, the LSP catalog number. Next, we're going to the 70s, and this is interesting. When this album came out, this was Madison Square Garden, and I remember this album real well because I saw Elvis in 1972 at the Chicago Stadium, and within only a couple months or a month, this album came out, and the shows were identical. They rushed the album out really fast, and when they did, the back cover almost looks like it's a Xerox copy. They didn't even bother to make the albums that they're trying to sell on the back in color. They're black and white. It's just like, well, let's hurry up and get that thing out. So they rushed it out. So you would think that by the time they did the reissue, okay, which came out many years later, okay, that they would at least have modified and made the back cover better. Well, no. It's the same kind of back cover. It's a cheap black and white photo. And not only that, but they decided not to include the Camden album. So it's kind of weird, isn't it? So you got, the original has both the Camden and Elvis Now advertised, whereas the other one just has Elvis Now. Go figure. But that's RCA. This is Love Letters from Elvis. Okay. Now, I don't know what it is about it. I like the pictures of Elvis on the cover. I think they're great shots. I think they look cool, and I think it's a great suit that he's wearing and everything. Just not too thrilled with the design for some reason. I don't know why. I would rather have just seen what they did, like Follow That Dream just put out Love Letters with just one image of Elvis on it, and that was great. But anyway, this one came out, and I noticed immediately, like when I bought it in the store, okay, this is how I bought it. This is exactly how I bought it, okay? Or no, I'm sorry. This is not how I bought it. See, this is how complicated this gets, okay? When I bought this album, it was this cover, okay? And now you're thinking, okay, well, what's the difference between the two covers? Well, this cover, if you'll notice, has RCA Victor at the top. It's not on the left or on the right where it normally is, okay? As I pointed out in the other reissues, it's actually on the top. So what's weird about this is RCA's at the top. Love Letters from Elvis, the title is on 2 lines. This was the first cover, okay? Now, being the first cover, it's supposed to have an orange label in it, okay? And that's how this album was released, with an orange label with RCA Victor at the top. Okay, now, here's where it gets weird. This album here, okay, I noticed right away there was something different about it. And I noticed the RCA was gone. And now Love Letters from Elvis, there's 3 titles there, okay? Now, when I also bought it at that time, inside was an orange label record. Okay? However, down in the corner, and you can't see it here, it says RE. So that means this is a reissue cover with a first issue record. Okay? So I was fortunate enough to find a bunch of these by a guy who worked for RCA or worked with Elvis in some fashion. This one here, which is supposed to be the first love letters with the orange label, they were all sealed. And I remember, I think I sold a copy to somebody. They opened it up and they came to me and complained because it had a tan record. And I'm like, oh, no, that's not right. It can't be. It didn't come with a tan record. Well, folks, it came with a tan record because I opened up almost every single one of those albums to check if it was tan or orange, and it was tan. So then I found several copies of this album, which is the reissue, and they had an orange copy and also a tan copy in both of these. But what doesn't make any sense is why they would release it by removing the RCA and then putting a tan label in, or putting the orange label in this one as well. So to make it even more interesting, to wrap up on this album, here's the final story of this. The Rca Victor, the reason for this, because you might ask yourself, well, why are there two of these in the first place? Why would they do that? Okay, well, here's what I found out through many, many years of research and talking to different people who worked for RCA, people who knew Elvis, et cetera, et cetera. And according to what I found out, the Rca Victor was put at the top by RCA. Colonel Parker did not like the fact that RCA was above Elvis Presley's name. So the colonel was upset, went to RCA and said, move the Rca Victor, put it anywhere, but do not put it over Elvis's name. So it ended up at the bottom, down there. That's where I have to believe that that's probably a true story, because even RCA, I don't think, would throw their trademark at the bottom of the album cover. But if it's the Colonel, maybe they would. Don't be surprised if when you're collecting this and you're looking for this, you come up with an orange or a tan in either cover, because technically speaking, they came in both covers. It's one thing to find it no matter whether it's in tan or it's orange, but try and find the black label reissue of Love Letters. And the black label's worth a lot of money. I can't remember what it's in the book, but probably a couple $100, if not more. So today we're going to have my first guest, John Barancyk, who I call Johnny B, who has always been an assistant to me whenever I work on Presleyanna. And we have a new Presleyanna coming up in a couple years, Presleyanna 9. And Johnny B usually is very, very knowledgeable about reissues and stuff. So here is part 1 of the interview with Johnny B.
Well, thanks, Bob. Thanks for having me.
Yep.
It's nice to be here.
And you've been had many times.
If you said you want to talk about Elvis, that's my number one subject.
Why don't you give us your story?
All right. Well, my story actually is a lot like yours in some ways. It's very close. But I came, let's start from the beginning. I like many Elvis fans, I came out of the womb an Elvis fan, okay? I came out of the womb. I was baptized into Elvis in 1968. Okay, that's when I was baptized into Elvis. Growing up, I did not know music. I did not particularly care. I was into sports, playing baseball, sports, football. We had some Mary Poppins records, I think, around my house, and some Sinatra. I did not care about music at all. Elvis was hot at the time, I'm sure, in '68, and the Beatles, but I just didn't know music. Finally, one afternoon, it was the summer of '68. We finished playing baseball in the afternoon, like we did, because that's what we did on summer vacation all summer. And I got to give them credit. I always have to give them, because they were the Matthew brothers. Growing up in Jefferson and Gary, Indiana, the Matthew brothers, Joe, John, and Jeff Matthews. And they said, "Hey, John, you want to come back to our house and have a bottle of pop, and we'll listen to some music?" So we went back to their house. And they brought out, we had a bottle of pop, and they brought out these albums. And I'm looking at these records. I'm seeing Elvis, and I didn't even know how to pronounce his name. I thought it was Elvis. It's like, what is an Elvis Presley? Had no clue of who he was. And they put on the soundtrack for Girl Happy. Well, this is the genius and the greatness of Elvis. We all know Elvis was a great singer. But the greatness of Elvis was his ability to touch people's hearts and souls. They put on Girl Happy, and before that, you know how short that song is. Girl Happy is like less than 3 minutes. Before that song was over, I was an Elvis fan. He was in my heart. He was in my soul. It's so difficult to explain, but that's just how it was. And from that moment, everything was Elvis. I took down the pictures in my home, in my bedroom, of race cars and that kind of stuff that I had up, and I started putting up Elvis. Now, it was a year later. It was almost, now it's what's funny is I didn't even watch the 68 comeback special, though, because I still didn't have all the knowledge of what was going on in his career. So I'm sad that I missed it live, at that time, but I didn't see it. But then in the summer of '69, I went to Montgomery Ward's. By that time, I started delivering newspapers and cutting lawns, making some money, because I had no money. I was a kid. I was 9, 10 years old. So I went to Ward's with some friends, and I saw the '68 comeback special. If I can show it, this is it right here. This is the first album I ever bought.
Okay.
I took it home, and my mom was a downer. I'll tell you. I'll never forget. You remember this stuff? I walked in the door, and my mom said, "What's in the bag?" And I said, "It's a record." I took it out, and she was mad at me. And she said, I'll never forget, she said, "Don't you think Elvis was ahead of your time? Don't you think he was And I said, "No." I said, I love the guy. And so she just didn't understand. My parents really didn't understand my obsession with Elvis. They just never, until 1973, when the Aloha from Hawaii show came on. And my mom watched it. And I'll never forget, when Elvis walked off the stage, my mom said, "That man is fantastic." And then the funny thing about my dad, he would be working in the basement sometime, doing working down there, doing stuff. And I would come home, come down the stairs, and what's on the 8-track player? Aloha from Hawaii. He was playing it like crazy. He loved that show. For me personally, I think the 3 best years of Elvis's career were 68, 69, and 70. I don't think it was the most historical time, obviously, like the Milton Berle, the beginning. But to me, I think the work he did from Elvis in Memphis and back in Memphis, I think it's 2 of the best Elvis albums he ever recorded. And the stuff he did in Vegas, come on, 69 and 70 when he went back, that's the way it is. That was the time to see Elvis.
Well, I'd say it went into 72.
Oh yeah,
I think from 69 to 72 or 73, that's probably where he was probably the best. Yeah. I think, or at least he was at his absolute peak.
The Madison Square Garden shows were he looked great. The only thing I never liked about the Aloha show was he just didn't move. He was very stiff.
But he was nervous.
He was very, very.
You could tell he was.
He was extremely nervous.
He wanted to do the best show he ever did. Yeah. So instead of screwing around, which he was used to doing on stage, he was going to, focus on the vocals and the songs, and that's what he did. and from a listening standpoint, if you listen to the soundtrack to Aloha, that soundtrack is like the perfect concert recording, because Elvis is definitely putting everything he's got into each and every song.
Yeah, no, I played when at the very beginning. I played all my Elvis records. I just bought anything I bought. I opened. I ripped the shrink off. I even, like I told you, I cut the album covers apart and put the pictures on the wall. I threw the back, so I don't need the back. So I taped the front of the covers.
And that's like a collector's sin.
Of course.
There's probably collectors watching this going, "What did you do? You cut the cover?"
I had no idea of collecting at that time.
Didn't you say that you put the records in one of those wired?
I had the records in those ugly wire mesh things that you pull them out and they scratch the record. That's where I had them.
Can you imagine how many albums you destroyed just by pulling them out of those racks?
I was a player. That time, I didn't realize the value of Elvis records until cassettes and 8-tracks started coming in. Then once that happened, then I started collecting the records. I didn't even play them at all. I just left them sealed, put them away in boxes. That was it. I listened to an 8-track and cassette.
I think everybody did something stupid with the originals, because you never knew they were going to be worth money. No. You never thought down the road you'd collect them. So they were just records, and that's all they were. Yeah. So what you did was you would take off the back covers and put them up. Okay, what I did, I happen to have, this is one of my original records that I had since a kid. As a matter of fact, this was found by my sister in the attic of our old house. And she called me up one day. She says, I've got one of your records in here. I'm like, what? And what I did to destroy my records was I wrote
your name.
Bob up in the corner. Every record, I wrote my name. This is an original record that I owned when I was 10 years old that I signed my name to.
Well, it's nice that you had it, because mine are all in the landfill now.
Yeah, I don't think how many people have the original records?
How many copies of Burning, when like 72 was a big year. When Burning Love came out, I don't know about you, but I went ballistic. Man, that song, I every week I went to the grocery store with my mom and I bought another 45 and another. I had them all plastered on the wall, the sleeve too. Yeah. I remember the story Ed Bonja told me about. Ed Bonja was the photographer who took many photos. Many of the album covers in the 70s and the 45s were Ed Bonja's pictures. I remember Ed told me, he says, I would bring these beautiful pictures for this, and he said Colonel Parker would always pick the worst one.
Yeah.
I just say, I'll use that one. It was blurry, it was not very good, and Colonel would say, well, I'll just use that one.
Yeah, and a good one example
and the good photos he passed on, and Ed never could understand that.
A good example of that was Burning Love, Camden album. Yeah, the picture is horrible.
Yeah, I don't.
It's out of focus. It's kind of blurry. It's got a red tint to it because of the red light coming on him. Yeah. The thing that got me the most upset was that stupid Chuck Berry song. That Chuck Berry song, I thought, My Ding-a-ling, a song about a guy's schlong beats out Burning Love, which is one of the best rockin', kind of comeback songs of the 70s for Elvis.
Well, I might be wrong. I thought I read somewhere where My Ding-a-ling was his first #1 song.
Well, it might have been.
And I could be wrong.
I can't imagine
if
how.
Somebody leave a comment down below if maybe I'm wrong.
You know what? I'm glad you mentioned that too, because if you do have any comments, make sure you leave some comments. Like if you want to say hello or anything like that, feel free to leave some comments, and of course subscribe to the channel. Very, very important. At this time, what I'd like to do is every show I'm going to have the collector's box, like I mentioned in the first one. So I want to pull out the collector's box here. And as I mentioned before, this is the actual box that I would always have with me at the shows. And you recognize this. And what we're going to do is I'm going to pull out a couple records here that actually are worth some money. And since we're talking a lot about reissues, then let me kind of focus on the fact that of why I said earlier that some reissues are actually worth more money than the originals. First of all, why don't you tell us about this album here? I mean, usually Pickwicks are like really like the bottom of the Elvis barrel because there's always thousands of Pickwick albums everywhere. Yeah. But why don't you tell us why this one could be worth up to $100 or more?
Well, this is a fairly new discovery. We only know about 4 or 5 copies known at this time. It has nothing to do with the cover. It's the ordinary Pickwick cover, front and back. There's nothing particularly important about the cover, but it's the record. It's the vinyl itself, the label itself.
Mm-hmm.
The label is the important. It is a label. It is a Pickwick with a grayish label with no P.
With no rainbow.
With no rainbow and the letter P for Pickwick.
Right, because all of the Pickwick albums always had their black label and they have like a P in the middle, big P, and it's rainbow colored.
Right. It's a USA pressing, printed in the USA, but we don't know much. We don't know where it came from. Not for sure, but it's pretty rare. I would say it's a pretty. If we don't know if this exists on any of the other Pickwicks or other titles.
Right.
If somebody out there has this label on another, Pickwick, then we need to know because it's got to go in. This is already in the latest Presley animal.
It is, yeah.
It is in the book, but the price is very wrong.
It'll definitely go up.
It's got to go up.
Yeah, because I think since we found it,
Yeah.
I think I've only seen 3.
Yeah,
I think a total of 3, and that would include the first person who showed it to us. We might want to mention that at the show.
Yeah, yes. The first person who brought it was John Daly.
Yep.
In Memphis, he brought it into your show. This was before John started his shows.
Right.
This was number of years ago, and John brought it in, and he showed it to us, and he had discovered it. So
Right.
John was the first. That's why we have it in the book, because it was a number. We were just getting ready to do the latest book.
Right. We got it just in time for that.
We got it just in time, and we got it. I think it's pictured in the book too.
Yeah.
So this is an example of a reissue. This is the stuff we live for when we discover these things like this.
Yeah.
After all these years, and we come up with something like.
Because you're talking like $100 for this record, roughly, and if you get it normally, it's like
it's a $10, yeah,
$5 or $10
for the normal Pickwick of this.
But you should also know too that the covers. There is a Canada cover, and there's also
it's been
US.
found. It's been found. I found it 2 different ways. This one has Ontario on the back.
Right.
Some of them, though, I did find another one in the cover in the back said USA.
Now I get to show one that I found a while back when I bought this huge collection from a collector, Ryan Pearson, and I have never seen this other than one other time. Okay, I'm pretty sure it's in the book.
Yes, it is in the book.
But this is an example again of reissues. Okay, this is Gold Records, Volume 4, incredibly common record. Okay, even the first pressings are not that hard to find. The only difference is it doesn't have the RCA and the Victor on it. Okay, like this one does, which shows that it's a later pressing from the 70s. The originals had the Nipper Dog and RCA. This one here is unique for many reasons. Number one is it's an AFL1. AFL1 catalog number was a catalog number that RCA used just around the time Elvis died. And they were going to like reissue all of his records with an AFL1, and then bang, he died. And then right after he died, the AFL1s kind of stopped. And then they went to APL when they wanted to produce, albums that had been out of print for a long time, like Double Trouble and stuff like that. But getting back to this, what's unique is, number one, it's an AFL1. But here's the trick. It's an AFL1, but it's an AFL1 tan label.
Now, there is a black of that on AFL, which is a black label with dog near top, which is much more common. But the tan is super,
but the tan is super hard. I think we've only seen it twice. I think it sold for probably about $100 at that time, $75 to $100. Now years have gone by, and it's still like, this is number 2, the second time I've ever seen it. Now, if any of you out there watching, if you have a copy of this, by all means, let me know so we know how many are being, how many have been discovered, and then we can document it. So this gives you an idea, like I was saying, the AFL1 number is real small for some reason. They put it twice on here. It's up here and it's up here, which is very unusual. And then down here is the RE. And I'll take some pictures of this and give you some close-ups so you can see it. But again, AFL1 tan label. And another thing that makes this unusual is the tan labels, which we could do a whole show about tan labels, are from 1976. And in 76, they were only out for a short period of time. And then all of a sudden they made this weird decision, well, we're going to go to black. And next thing you know, the blacks were all AFL1s. That's when they started the AFL1s. So for some reason, maybe what happened was this one slipped out. Maybe they were doing it in 76, changed the AFL1s, and then bang, this made this decision at the last minute not to do tans, and then all the AFLs are now they're black label. Anyway, very rare record, and it's also an example of, like I said earlier, of a record that actually is worth more than the original, far more. Not sure what this one's worth, but I'm sure it's well over $100 easy, and it'll show up in the next price guide, and it definitely deserves a leap up a little bit because of that in the price.
The only thing that makes the original worth some money, the original, is if you have the bonus photo. My advice to everybody too is get Presleyana. It's a great reference library. Forget the prices. Some people are controversial about prices, but we worked our butts off. And we scanned all the hype stickers. We scanned all the bonus items in there. There's many rare labels that are pictured. It's a great reference, just as a good library book to collect. Collecting is about knowledge. You have to have knowledge when it comes to record. I don't care who it is, whether it's the Beatles or Elvis or anybody. You have to have the knowledge of knowing what to buy. And having condition, to me, is buying is most important, I think.
Well, but having that being said, a lot of the prices in Presleyana are not just guesses.
Oh no,
because one of the reasons I think Jerry came to me way back when, about 5 editions ago or 4 editions ago, and asked me to be a part of it, was that I sold the records.
Right.
So I would know if I sold a record for $5,000, then I know it went for $5,000. If it goes for $10, I know it went for $10. So some of the prices are fairly accurate based upon what I sold them for.
Yeah.
Now that doesn't mean that everybody would pay that.
No.
And it doesn't mean that it's for sure that that's what it's worth. But if you see a record that we put in there that's like $200, you can count on that being a valuable record.
Right.
And if you find it somewhere for $25 to $50, don't be afraid to buy it for $25 to $50 if it's in the book for $2. Everybody bitches about the high prices of the book, right? When they don't have the record.
Right.
But the minute they get the record, then they go, well, it's $1,000 in the book.
Yeah. It's for sale, but you said
I've got it.
Yeah, you said you didn't go by the prices in the book. Now you're selling it. Now you're going by. Now the prices in the book are important.
Yeah, the book is only important when you've got it in your collection.
The main
That's it.
Listen, something is ultimately worth what somebody's willing to pay.
In the comment section, a few people said hello to us. One of our dear friends, Dennis Quintavalli, who we've known at the Elvis conventions for a long, long time. He said hello, and we're saying hello back, Dennis. I'm glad you like the show, and I hope you keep watching. Also, Gary Brown, who is probably one of the biggest collectors in the United States of America. Gary, thank you for the nice comment you put about the show. Also wanted to thank Christian Ziegler Remy, who is a guy from another country. I think he's from Norway, I believe. And he made a bunch of suggestions about the show, about maybe exploring some of the pressings of Sun Records and things of that nature, and dogless labels and things like that. And I'll do that. I'll do a show dedicated to 45s in the future, and we'll talk about that stuff. But I did want to spend this show in particular on just introducing the fact that there are originals and there are reissues, because you gotta know. I'm Robert Alaniz, and thanks for watching, and I'm out of here.